Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Today is Monday, October 31st. Happy Halloween. This is not my costume. This is my relaxed post-vacation golf shirt. So I hope that it's not. I hope that you're, do not adjust your screens, folks. This is actual reality. Thanks for being with us. Normally today we'd have an Amiable Skeptics episode up, but because both Adam Baldwin and I were on vacation last week, we didn't get a chance to record anything. We will be recording new episodes this week. So on Thursday, you should be able to see the latest episode. And we're going to be focusing on midterms and maybe a little bit about Elon Musk, a little bit about Twitter. Adam and I get into these great wide-ranging, conversations. And if you're a VIP member, you can watch each and every one of those episodes, and they're always available here at Hot Air, so you can always go back to them. And the first episode should drop on Thursday. Today, I talk with AJ Kaufman about the midterms, a little bit about Ukraine, but mostly about the midterms. Of course, AJ's a little bit of a skeptic on Republican chances. I'm a little bit more bullish on it, so it's a great conversation. You should really enjoy this. We talk a lot about what's going on in the polls, whether or not what the polls are reflecting what actual reality is in this instance. I think that it's finally coming back around to actual reality. He thinks that there's actually an actual Republican surge here coming up at the end. Either way, it's good news for the Republicans. We differ on how that's going to manifest itself in the actual midterm results. And of course, in 8 days, we're going to figure that out, or 8, 9, 10, 11 days, however long it takes to get the results back in some of these races. We'll start figuring out exactly what those results are. But we're coming down to the wire. So really, everything that we're talking about is going to be midterm focused, or maybe Elon Musk focused. I have a great, I had a great response for my post today on Elon Musk's claim to have uncovered evidence of fraud in the sale of Twitter. He says more to come. Stay tuned. I ask, is anybody staying tuned to anything else but Elon Musk and the midterms? I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but I do know that we are all sort of hanging on this story, and for good reason. We're interested in making sure that we can return free speech principles to a speech platform like Twitter, and I don't know if we're going to get that from Elon Musk. He's trying to tamp down some expectations of immediate changes. Right now, he's saying that whatever the policies were before his sale are still in place, but they're looking at it. They're going to form some sort of moderation council at Twitter. I volunteered my services as long as it's an adjunct. I like my job. I don't want to go work for Elon Musk. I really don't want to work for Elon Musk in the sense of drawing a salary. But if he's looking for people to sit on a council and talk about how Twitter should be moderated, I'd be happy to do that. I've also nominated, Adam for that. Might actually be closer to the issue anyway. He's probably a better choice, but yeah, we've got a lot of great content coming up today, and for the next couple of weeks at least at Hot Air regarding the midterms. If you're watching this, you've probably already seen some of the other things that we're talking about here. I have a VIP column up today talking about CBS YouGov's generic ballot of R+2, but R+16 among independents. It's really emblematic of what the problem is with polling right now. And this is really a very strange polling result from a pollster that has been a consistent outlier. That actually comes up in my conversation with AJ as well. Karen Townsend talks about the Georgia gubernatorial debate where Stacey Abrams is doubling down on the race card. I actually have that. I have a clip from that in a later post, not VIP, on a poll from the Grio, which is a progressive Black publication that shows defund the police is only getting 17% support from Black voters. Twice as many Black voters want police funding increased rather than decreased, and 48% want it kept the same as it was before. So it's very much a fringe movement. I've got that post probably up as you're seeing this, and that is that's something else. And David Ferdoso over at the Washington Examiner actually has a really good editorial or column on this, which I quote in my post about this. But I also embed a clip from that Saturday debate between Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp, where Brian Kemp talks about how he's gotten the endorsement of 107 sheriffs in Georgia. And Stacey Abrams dismisses this as 107 people who want to take black people off the streets. Well, even among black voters, that message isn't selling. And so my question is, just who are Democrats talking to these days? Because it's not the mainstream of American voters on any of these issues. It's a very, very narrow band of elite academics that they're calculating their messaging towards, and they're about to reap the whirlwind of that particular choice. James Carville's been talking about this for months. He's been talking about this for months. Democrats are not listening. They're about to get, I think, really shellacked in a way that maybe might outstrip 2014 in terms of expectations. Everybody expected Democrats to get wiped out in 2010. Nobody really expected the big wipeout in 2014. I think that's the scale that we should be looking at in terms of what we're approaching next week. Lots of other great stuff. John Sexton is following up on, and this is the thing I really wanted to talk about today. John Sexton's going to follow up on this Paul Pelosi assault story, which is just, I mean, first off, it's a terrible story. The guy's in his 80s and he gets hit in the head with a hammer. That's a terrible story. It's awful. What we don't know, however, is what the hell was going on there. And yet the media is just piling up on this, saying that it's because Republicans run perfectly normal political ads that highlight Nancy Pelosi as a Democratic Party leader as a reason not to vote for Democrats. Now that is mainstream politics. There is nothing unusual about that. And yet you had people across the media spectrum demanding that Republicans take down those ads because it was the proximate cause of this assault on the Pelosi's. That's absurd. It's insane. It doesn't even follow the facts of this case. And Michael Schellenberger's actually been doing a great job of going out and getting the reporting on this. John Sexton is going to follow up on that. He's got a post. He's got a post that will be up by the time you see this, so you should go look at this. But this is what I really wanted to say today. And John's probably going to say this something very similar. He's writing it as I'm recording this, which is that the mainstream media is not about reporting the news anymore. It's not about reporting the facts. It's about crafting a narrative and imposing a didactic on their audience. And this is it's almost a reductio ad absurdum of this. This is the same media that couldn't bother to report on actual political violence when you had an assassin show up on Brett Kavanaugh's street, thanks to doxing by radical extremists on abortion who were conducting illegal demonstrations in front of these justices' houses. There's a federal law against that the Department of Justice wouldn't enforce. And when that assassin showed up, who was charged with attempted murder, he's charged with intending to assassinate Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and the media treated it like it's a local news story and never connected any dots to the rhetoric that was going on in front of Brett Kavanaugh's house at the time. And yet, the same media that couldn't bother to report on that, the same media that kept telling us that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation, is now the media that's saying, oh, you can't run political ads that mention Nancy Pelosi because it might create violence. This is nuts. I don't know who the media thinks they're talking to, but the American people are a lot smarter than this. And apparently, the people who run these media outlets are not very smart at all. And it's become very clear that these guys are nothing more than a propaganda wing for this administration and for the Democratic Party. And it's becoming more and more clear as we go along. And I got to tell you, I mean, I was on vacation. Kept wanting to write something to this effect. I'm like, no, you're on vacation. You really need rest. You really need to take a break. You took a vacation for a reason. And I did. I did do a little bit of work. I won't say hire or wear, but when you're in charge of stuff, you got to still do a little bit of work. But I'm glad that, David Strom's been writing about this. John Sexton's been writing some great posts about this. Jazz Shaw, Karen Townsend, Beach Wellborn, they're doing a great job. And it was fine for me to step away because these guys are terrific. But in this podcast, I wanted to make sure that we got that message out. This current media industry is corrupt as hell. You can't trust a damn thing that they say. And the idea that this is some sort of reason to shut up Republicans is just part of their overall mission to shut down Republicans. And that's how you have to look at this. And by the way, that's the reason why you should sign up for VIP. We're going to have a pitch at the end, though. I won't get into that. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Be sure to stick around. There's lots more content coming up at Hot Air. You're going to have a lot of great posts to read and to comment on if you're a VIP or a VIP Gold member. We're going to get back to the Amiable Skeptic show this week. Plus, I've got my VIP Gold chat coming up on Wednesday at 1:30 Eastern time. So with Cam Edwards, I come back to that. Apparently, they had a great time without me. And we're going to find out about that. Let me tell you. Thanks for watching. Now, stay tuned for AJ Kaufman on the midterms and then that final VIP pitch at the end. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining us before the midterms, AJ Kaufman, political commentator extraordinaire. He's everywhere these days. I don't even know where to plug you, AJ. These days you're kind of writing for everybody.
I try to spread out the good word, whether it's on politics or local news, whatever it might be.
Or cats. I hear cats in the background. There you go.
The cats will always be around cheering me on, apparently, at any time on the air. Yes.
All right. Well, that's good. That's good. I think that's a good sign. And speaking of signs, we're going to talk about the midterms. We're also going to get to Ukraine at the end of the thing because there's some good developments, or at least interesting developments in that story too. But, you know, the midterms, I have my theory about the polls in the midterms, which is that the so-called Democratic rebound over the summer and Joe Biden's rebound over the summer was nothing more than a media narrative journalism that leaked into a bunch of media commission polls. And now that you're coming down to the wire where polls have to start thinking about how they're going to look after the election results come in, all of a sudden we're seeing renewed enthusiasm and a shift in momentum to the GOP in the closing days. I'm not really buying that. What's your take on that, AJ?
I think there's some relevance to what you're saying. There's no doubt that the media is controlled by Democrats or those sympathetic to them. Some of the polling outlets outside of Trafalgar and a couple others certainly probably are controlled by people who are sympathetic to progressives and liberal ideology. But you know, I've always said from day one, and Ed, you and I have been discussing this for a year probably, and we've gone through some of the primaries. Yeah, that the 2024 map is great for Republicans, the Senate map, if you look at it. But the 2022 map has never been great for Republicans.
Right.
And then you factor in some lackluster candidates. I could think of 3 or 4 subpar candidates who had the GOP primary voters chosen someone else in each of those races. I don't think they'd even be in play. You know, they did well in Missouri, picking Eric Schmidt. We haven't thought about Missouri in 3 months because of that.
We talked about Missouri. We talked about that before Schmidt won the primary, right? Which was, hey, there's going to be a risk. We also talked about Don Bolduc in New Hampshire, who, you know, Maggie Hassan's Aiken strategy worked out pretty well there, or at least it seems that way, although recent polling there suggests that might end up backfiring on Democrats.
It's possible. They did promote a lot of the more populist MAGA candidates, Democrats, because they thought those people would be easier to defeat. And that may backfire in New Hampshire. I don't think it will, by the way. I do think Maggie Hassan will hang on. The Democrats seem to always hang on in New Hampshire, much as Republicans seem to usually hang on in Texas and elsewhere when Democrats have some optimism. But, you know, on the other hand, and Kari Lake, who is a lunatic, but has run actually a very focused campaign now that she's stopped talking about election conspiracies and actually focused on actual issues, has done pretty well. And she's doing better than Blake Masters. And Blake Masters, along with Dr. Oz and Herschel Walker, are subpar candidates who, had we chosen someone else in those states, I believe, certainly in Arizona and Pennsylvania, we would be winning. Not to mention in Ohio, where I do think Republicans will probably still win because Mike DeWine the much maligned, by people on the far right, Mike DeWine, who was a phenomenal governor, is up by 20 points in some polls and is going to win. And he very well may be able to pull J.D. Vance, who was a subpar candidate pushed by Donald Trump, over the finish line. J.D. Vance has a good story, but he decided to become a different kind of person when he ran for office. And even in a red state like Ohio, where I used to live, Vance is struggling. So, and we can also talk about other states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, where, perhaps a different candidate might do better, but I think we should be okay in those states.
I don't think we're going to have a problem in Wisconsin. And I thought Johnson was actually the weakest of the incumbents coming into this.
He is very weak. Let me just say this on Wisconsin. Johnson's going to win probably in a close race in a bluish state, running as a very, very conservative candidate. He always seems to wind up winning, but that's mostly because the Democrats are morons in Wisconsin.
Well, Mandela Barnes Barnes turns out to be like we talk about candidate quality, right? When it comes to Republicans, nobody's talking about that when it comes to Mandela Barnes. Mandela Barnes is a lunatic.
That's correct. He's in his 30s. He is lieutenant governor of the state, which
he
says a lot.
So's John Fetterman in Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah. Lieutenant governors, thankfully, is a pretty irrelevant role in most states. And that's why you see some of these crazy guys that wind up running for governor and senator. And you're like, wow, how did this guy become the number 2 person in the state? But Barnes, yeah, if the Wisconsin Democrats had run someone sane, and they had a few candidates in the primary, and best I recall, they all dropped out when Mandela Barnes got in, which says a lot about another issue that we don't need to get into, but they clearly didn't want to run against him. And he's an awful candidate. No matter how much Barack Obama and others go to pump him up, the Democrats should win that state. It's a bluish state, and the population centers will go for Democrats. But outside of Milwaukee and Madison, Ron Johnson's going to rack up probably 75, 80% of the vote and win that race, even though I think it'll be close. So candidate quality matters, which has been a theme all over. We see that at the gubernatorial level, Senate, and even House.
Well, I think, when you have a candidate who's professing his admiration for, Ali Khamenei on Twitter and doesn't clean that up before he starts running for the U.S. Senate, discussing his desire to be posted to Havana because he admires the Castro regime.
Well, in Madison, that works.
Well, it might work in California, too, for that matter. Even statewide, it might work in California. But I mean, there are so many things wrong with the Mandela Barnes campaign and the Democrats' selection of him, just on sheer, operational issues. Don't you just dump the Twitter feed and start over from scratch when you've got a candidate like that? Just delete it. Make people look through the Wayback Machine to try to find any weird tweets. But no, those tweets are still live. I wrote a post about this. I was on vacation last week, right? So I wrote a post about this the week before last, and those tweets were still live. I mean, they were embeddable. Now, maybe by this time it's been deleted. I haven't gone back to check, but I mean, it's just crazy stuff in this. And look,
it's not covered as much though by the media, fortunately.
No, but you got to give the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel some credit. They at least did report on it.
Yes, they did.
So, yeah, but look, I mean, I think that I hear you on candidate quality, because candidate quality clearly matters. But I think when you're looking at Georgia and when you're looking at Arizona, and you're even looking at New Hampshire, where I think Bolduc was really maybe the most questionable of all the choices that were made, right? And I know what happened there is that Maggie Hassan did the Claire McCaskill strategy,
Mm-hmm.
picked her most favored opponent and made sure that he won in the primary by attacking everybody else. I think when you're looking at the environment of this electorate, and I think people are still underestimating what this environment actually is. I think that actually pulls the marginal candidates across pretty easily. And I think when you're looking at Tiffany Smiley getting within a couple of points of Patty Murray in Washington, for instance, I am not going to predict that Smiley's going to win that race, but the fact that she's even within a virtual tie range of Murray tells you something about this environment. And that we haven't had a high inflation electoral environment in 42 years in an election.
Right. And that's what's pulling the GOP ahead in the House for sure. And hopefully
and
the Senate
crime
level.
plus crime.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Democrats have started, especially Democrats in closely contested races, have begun to talk more about crime, Social Security, Medicare. That's been a big topic all of a sudden. The Democrats, they're bleeding working class voters.
Yeah,
and
that's
they
a
haven't talked
distraction.
about working class concerns, right?
Everybody knows that's a distraction too, because I mean, the CBS YouGov poll, which I shred today, by the way, in a VIP column, for lots of reasons. That's the same poll that has Republicans up 16 points against Democrats in the generic ballot among independents, but somehow only R+2 overall. I mean, you go figure out how that math works. I looked at that poll and I still can't figure out how they end up with only R+2, except that it's CBS and YouGov. But one of the things that they talk about in there is that voters really aren't worried about Social Security, Medicare. They don't think Republicans are going to cut it, and it's not one of their main concerns. Their biggest concern in that poll, by far, is the economy and inflation, and those are almost tied for the top two slots. And coming in third is crime. I mean, and Democrats aren't talking about those things to the extent.
Well, they're starting to a little bit.
Well, they're calling it racist.
They've been focusing on abortion, gun control, climate change, and quote unquote, safeguarding or saving democracy. That doesn't connect. That connects with white woke liberal elites in wealthy suburbs and college campuses. It doesn't connect with working class voters and swing voters.
Nope.
So belatedly, some of them wake up and start reminding candidates or reminding each other that they need to convince these swing voters or working class voters that they care about their economic well-being, but they do it with only a fortnight left. And of course, they're talking about Social Security and Medicare, which it might get cheers at a rally, but I don't know if that's going to be, the deciding factor. And nor will abortion, nor will safeguarding democracy and climate change. I mean, it's what you said it is. And Democrats, it's amazing how long it takes them. You mentioned the issues. I'm looking at a poll that I pulled up this morning. I forget where it comes from. It comes from a left-leaning outlet. Voters want candidates for Congress, which I guess includes Senate, to prioritize inflation in the economy. And the most important issues, inflation, 37%, jobs in the economy, 35%, crime, 23%, immigration, 22%. Now you do get Social Security and Medicare and gun control at 20%, but then you got to go way, way down, Ed, to find abortion, and even farther down to find voting rights, coronavirus, and much to my dismay, national security is way toward the bottom too. But
well, it's a congressional election, right? I mean, national security is more of a presidential election cycle sort of thing, and it's not the pressing issue in this cycle. I mean, if the economy was healthy and crime rates were low, things like abortion might matter. I mean, healthcare mattered in 2018 because everything else was pretty good, right? Republicans tried to run on the border again and blew it because nobody was concerned about the border. After the Republicans had screwed up the repeal of Obamacare, everybody's worried about what was going to go on with healthcare, and Republicans didn't have a plan for it. And so, and of course, it's midterms. You had the Russian collusion thing going on. So Republicans were talking past the voters on the issue that mattered most. Trump was the issue that mattered most in that cycle, really. But healthcare was the
They're
issue.
Trying to bring up Trump.
Area.
You notice Trump has been pretty quiet. He's done a few rallies, been pretty quiet since about Labor Day. And that's about the time that the polls started going back toward the Republicans' favor. I have to be honest here. When Donald Trump is an issue, it helps Democrats. When he's not, it helps Republicans.
I agree with
People
that.
should think about that for 2024 when they
agree
think
with
about
that.
who they want to vote for in a presidential primary.
I agree with that, but I want to get past the midterms before I start getting into that too much.
Yeah, no, that's all I was saying. I was just saying. It's candidate quality. Yeah. I mean, this should be despite the unfavorable map, with all the things we mentioned about the environment and Biden's lack of popularity, we should be getting up to 54 or 55 seats. So when I hear people who are a little bit Pollyannish, like Kellyanne Conway and others, say we're going to get 54, 55 seats, that'd be great. But we would be much more likely to get that had our nominees been different in the 4 or 5 key states. I still think. Well, I won't make any predictions.
You're talking about in the Senate. You're talking about. I'm
sorry, in the Senate. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking you're talking about House pickups because I was going to say
the House.
That's a huge. That's a
huge
Newt
number.
Gingrich
was talking 70 at some point, but he actually has been put out to pasture, I think, and laughed off the stage. Most sane people are now talking 15 to 20, maybe 25.
No, I think it's good. I think the over under is 25, and I'm taking the over. Look, I mean,
you have to look at all the races. You really do, because that means that almost all the close ones would have to go the Republicans' way, which they could, but that's a lot.
In this environment, yeah. And I'm telling you right now, 25 seats doesn't even get you to where you were at after the 2010 race. So those seats.
Yeah, but you started from a much lower point.
No, that's what I'm saying though. We were at 108. Republicans were at 188 seats. Going into 2010, they won 63 seats, so they ended up with 251 seats. Well, that's 39 off from where we're at right now.
Right.
Okay. So I think that the over-under here is 25. 25 is a decent night for Republicans. I think it's actually going to be higher than that. I think you're going to get back up to about 250 based on what the polling looks like at the moment. And honestly, what the electoral environment looks like at the moment. And this gets back to something that we've been kind of talking about throughout this conversation, which is that the news media, pollsters have really missed the boat on what the daily lived experience of voters are in this environment. The daily lived experience of this
lived experience, Ed. Good word. Lived experience.
I've been saying this for months. The lived experience of voters. Yeah, I know. So I'm flogging my brand now. Okay, so the daily lived experience of American voters is inflation at the grocery store, shortages at the grocery store, crime, and to some extent border issues. But I think that depends on where you live too. So that is, but across the country, inflation and crime are the daily lived experiences of Americans. And that gets worse as you get into the cities, which is where the Democrats' power base is at. And that's the reason why I think that this actually is going to be a much bigger a red wave than maybe even the polls are showing at the moment. And it's also the reason why, AJ, that I never bought the Democratic rebound based on abortion over the summer. That to me was an entirely media created, narrative. And to the extent that there was any sort of rebound on that, it was because that was all the media wanted to talk about. Now, this week, I just came back from vacation. Now, this week, it's all about how political rhetoric is endangering members of Congress and their families, and Republicans have to pull ads off the air because Paul Pelosi got assaulted in his home. And I'm astounded that they're pulling this because it was just 3 months ago that an assassin showed up on Brett Kavanaugh's street based on information from radical extremists that had doxed him and the other Supreme Court justices, whose admitted deliberate motive was to change the outcome of Dobbs, versus women's health. And the media covered it like it was a local news story. But suddenly now political rhetoric is bad. And I don't think anybody's buying this crap anymore. I don't think there's a single person whose vote is convertible in this race that is buying this crap anymore from the media.
Well, that's true. That's what Chris Sununu and Tom Emmer, who's a Minnesota congressman, chair of the Republican Congressional Committee,
Minnesota
Sununu,
6,
the governor of New Hampshire. Right, exactly. Right. I used to live. They were on CBS and NBC respectively, and they were being pressured by Chuck Todd and Margaret Brennan to condemn, the hammer attack. And of course they did, but they also mentioned Kavanaugh and Scalise. In Scalise's case, of course, people that were shot. In Kavanaugh's case, no one thankfully was physically harmed. So it's a little bit different, I guess. But a Supreme Court justice versus the husband of a Speaker of the House, you can compare that as you will. I think you're right. People aren't concerned about that. I think my only concern still, besides candidate quality, and I do realize abortion is an issue for a lot of suburban, again, upper middle class folks. Some of them are swing voters. I know a couple who may swing their vote one way or another based on that, unfortunately, more likely to the left. But it's very murky out there. That's my concern, Ed. It's murkier than usual because of the bizarre nature of so many of these races, because of the candidates, because of the issues, because of even Trump. At this point, races are usually baked in, and we're seeing real fluctuations in the polls. I was pretty confident 24, 36 hours ago. And then this morning, Real Clear Politics drops the New York Times Siena poll showing Oz down 6, Walker down 3, Masters, who I think has very little chance because he's a terrible candidate. He's a Tucker Carlson candidate, enough said. He's down 6 or 7. And Laxalt, who I'm pretty confident is at even. Again, these polls will be wrong, could be wrong. But it's one of those issues. How many people have voted early? And I still think, unfortunately, Fetterman is likely to win that race because over 1 million Pennsylvanians voted early before the disastrous debate. And Oz, again, not to be redundant, is a bad candidate. He actually had a very bad debate, Oz. He's a novice. He's not a traditional Republican. He reminds me a little bit of Trump. He's sort of new to conservative speak. Yep. And if you watch that debate, it was the worst debate of the year by far, by the way. I've watched all of them. It's unfortunate that was the one that got national attention because it was terrible. You watch the Michigan governor's debate, you watch the Florida debates. They were good debates. Even Wisconsin was a good debate. But Oz was bad. He didn't know how to answer questions, and he seemed like he had a list of 7 or 8 points he wanted to make and rambled them off and went on from there. I think he'll be a good senator if he wins. I think he's a terrible candidate. We should have had McCormick or Bartos in that state and probably would have won. And of course, the elephant in the room is Mastriano, who is a raging lunatic, anti-Semitic jackass, who is going to lose badly in the governor's race, and that will pull down Oz a little bit too.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. I think Shapiro is obviously the superior candidate there in the gubernatorial race in Pennsylvania. And I think Shapiro was always going to run away with that one, regardless of what the political environment was. I don't think the Siena poll. I think the Siena poll. I saw that this morning. Looks like an outlier to me. And I've seen some. Siena's not necessarily been the most reliable pollster in the field either, especially when they're teaming up with the New York Times. And I'm sorry, but those media commission polls have problems. That CBS YouGov poll is insane, and it has been all along. YouGov has been an outlier on Joe Biden's on the generic ballot and on Joe Biden's approval rating all year long, and this. Yep. This result, I haven't had a chance to really dig into. I've only seen the top lines from Siena on these races. I haven't had a chance to dig into.
I know you dig into them a lot deeper than the average person, so that's good. You look at and people should look at who they poll.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you do. And I just happen to see that today. What I'll say this, Ed, and we can sort of close our election talk and maybe move on to Ukraine at the end. Democrat success really will depend on whether these candidates, their candidates, most of whom are pretty weak as well, with a few exceptions, whether these candidates will rise or can rise above Biden's historically low approval ratings and the national mood. So Biden's at like 35% in most of these states.
Yeah.
I think he's a little higher in Pennsylvania, but he's around 35, 36, 37 in Nevada and Georgia and Arizona. And, obviously Mark Kelly is beating up Biden's approval rating in Arizona by like double figures. And Fetterman is still ahead of Biden by, I think, 7 or 8 in his approval in Pennsylvania. I don't know what Warnock is, who's another awful candidate, what his compared to Biden. That's the problem, is that, these guys are all probably slightly more popular than Biden is in these states. And that's what concerns me. You can't just say Biden's unpopular and historically bad president, hence Democrats will lose all these races. We'll have to see. I also think, by the way, education is an issue we don't talk about as much.
Parental rights and education,
episode. Yeah, saw that in Virginia last year. I don't think that's gone away, especially as we move into the winter.
Again, the daily lived experience of American families.
Lived experiences.
That's one of the daily lived experiences of American families, and the shutdowns and remote learning was a revolutionary moment in that. It's the reason why. And you take a look at what happened last year in Virginia and New Jersey too. New Jersey, Phil Murphy damn near lost that election, and nobody had that on their radar. Everybody thought that that Virginia was too blue for Republicans to win, and they end up sweeping the statewide races based on what? Based on the daily lived experiences and the radical extremism of the Democratic Party in education. And that issue hasn't gone away. And again, that's all part of this gestalt. Dwayne Patterson in his VIP column this morning talks about the three-legged stools. We talk about it in terms of conservatism. He's talking about it in terms of the overall electorate. Messing with your paycheck, messing with your family, and I forget what the third one is. It's a really great post.
You may see that. You may see that in New York with Zeldin being close. I don't know if he'll win, but he's very close. And there's a lot of congressional races in upstate New York that are very close that normally aren't. You may see that there. You may see that in Michigan with the governor's race. You may see that maybe in the LA mayor's race in California. Other places you might see it where liberal politicians shut down schools and ruin kids and families' lives for a year or 2.5.
All right, AJ.
Yes.
Before we move on to Ukraine, I got to get your prediction. What's your prediction for the Senate?
Oh, No, no, no. Look, I'm less optimistic than a lot of Republicans, and it's not. We have friends. I have friends that are even less optimistic, and I have friends who are bullish, talking 54, 55 Senate seats. If I had a gun to my head, and hopefully I don't have a gun to my head because that would be scary. I would say, and again, this is not being recorded, of course. I firmly believe. Look, there could be a red wave I don't know about. We might get to 53 or 54. That's possible. We saw 2 years ago, Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, and Tom Tillis were all in like heated races and won by 20 points or 10 points. So it's either going to be like 53, 54, or I would say 50-50. And I say 50-50 because I don't think we're going to pick up any seats except for maybe Nevada and an outside chance at Georgia. But I would say just one seat we pick up. And I think we lose Pennsylvania.
All right. I'm going to predict 52.
Okay.
I'll predict 52, and I'll predict that we're going to be in the 240s in the House.
Yeah, I don't know if 240 would mean we would add how many seats?
28 seats.
Okay. And I'm going to go around 20. But right. I would have to look at individual races, because even though 85% of House races are never up for grabs, that still means 15 or 20% are, which by my quick math means 60 or 70, 80 seats are in play. And, we could win a lot of those, certainly. I'll have to look at all of them, though.
All right. Now let's talk about Ukraine. We've got about 5 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about this because you cover this quite a bit. And I've been following this even though I've been on vacation because it's, a very important story. Nuclear war sort of gets your attention even when you're at Walt Disney World.
When Ed Morrissey goes on vacation.
I just went away for a week and y'all just missed everything. I don't know what to say to you guys. All right.
Yeah, you missed Pramila Jayapal. That was the best of the week, or the worst.
Damn it. Yeah, Pramila Jayapal released a memo critical of supporting Ukraine on behalf of House progressives that ended up blowing up in her face, claiming that she never authorized the release, that a staffer did it, and that a staffer came back and was leaking, not on the record, saying, no, she's the one who authorized that. None of us would have been stupid enough to release that without her okay.
And she takes full responsibility, but the staffer is to blame. I think that's the gist of it.
Yeah. Yeah. The non-apology apology. Yes. Ironically, I told a few people a few days before that I'm still waiting for the far left to turn against Ukraine. Now, I realize we have a cabal and on the populist MAGA right that has been against Ukraine aid for a while. 57 or so voted against it earlier this summer. Yeah.
Some are more against it than others, but majority of Republicans are still in favor of it. But I kept thinking, where are these left-wing Democrats who always oppose military action? They were only supporting it tacitly, I think, because Biden's president. And, the isolationism, if you will, on the far right and far left is similar. There's rhetoric from Bernie Sanders that I would hear on Tucker Carlson and so on, or Ron Paul, back in the day. So Jayapal, this was signed by all of your favorite people, all of your dinner guests, Cori Bush, AOC, Barbara Lee, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib. How would that be for a dinner at a nice steakhouse? Those people hanging out with you for a while. Boy, that would be fun. But they want an end to the war. They want diplomacy. They want peace negotiations. So do people on the far right, like Paul Gosar, who wants to have them in Phoenix. He wants to bring Putin and G. That'd be funny too. He wants to bring Putin and Zelensky to some hotel in Phoenix to hammer out a negotiation to end this war, which is the most ridiculous thing I've heard in a while.
Probably the one in Scottsdale. It's got a great golf course next.
Yeah, I was gonna say Scottsdale or Ventana Canyon.
There you go. Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah.
So Jayapal, they wrote this in July. So they've been thinking this since July. And they admitted it. It's what they believe. They're lying when they say they rescind it. And the hard left is equally or more opposed to our involvement as the neo-isolationist right. And it's all political. I'm glad some Democrats stood up and said it was ridiculous. The timing is hilarious and sad because of not only the elections, but Putin's marching on and trying to, some troops are withdrawing, but Putin's also, on the brink of nuclear war, some people believe. At least Ro Khanna said that he thought the letter was common sense. He told CNN he's a far left guy, but he's an honest guy.
Right.
So I said in my column to close it out, I just so you know, I said any negotiating with Russia over the heads of Ukraine is immoral. No useful diplomacy should occur as long as Ukrainians are willing to fight for their homeland and Putin refuses to cede territory. The best way to counter Putin is to continue supporting Ukraine's heroic struggle against Russian forces. And look, I think you want to end this with peaceful negotiations. Ed, return all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. Have Russia pay all the reconstruction costs. Return all the Ukrainian citizens. Turn over Russia's political and military leaders for war crimes at The Hague. Remove Russia from the UN Security Council. That's harsh, but that's
a surrender. My friend, that is not a negotiation. That's a surrender, and that's never going to happen. Not willingly.
I know it's not going to happen, but it's no more far-fetched and quixotic than having negotiations at the golf course in Scottsdale or at Pramilla's house in Seattle.
Hey, we can bring them down to Central Texas. There's a couple of nice places out here, and if they annoy us, there's lots of empty space that we can dump them in.
And 70% of Republicans still support the Ukrainian war effort. So for Biden and the Democrats to act like Republicans are against it, most of them are not on the side of some of these radical congressmen or the Federalist or the Nation magazine on the left. They're just not.
I will give you this. Well, I will argue with you on to some extent on this. I think that there is a principled position that says we shouldn't be involved in this, and because it threatens a wider war to have us involved in this, and it's a European issue, and that we should let the Europeans settle this. I think that I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's a principled position. I think the idea that there's a radical fringe on the right that believe that Vladimir Putin is actually the defender of Western civilization in Eastern Europe, which is nuts. And I've run across people, for years trying to make that argument, and I've tried to disabuse. I'm telling you, I had a very good friend of mine this is back in Minnesota, where at the church, who kept telling me, oh, this is what Vladimir Putin's doing for Western Christianity. He's defending Western Christian values.
Yeah, they've gone into the Christian stuff. A lot of people, and I've heard it, they're saying he's the defender of Western Christianity. I've heard that. It's amazing. Yeah,
and he wasn't the only one. He's the one that I talked to the most because he was a good friend of mine, and I kept trying to tell him, the only use that Vladimir Putin has of Christianity is as a mask for Russian imperialism. This is the same Russian imperialism that goes back to the czars. And
105 years we've been dealing with. Well, go back to the czars, even more than 105 years.
Oh, my goodness. You can go back 300-400 years with this stuff. This is great game stuff. This is, this is the Crimean War, of 160 years ago stuff. This is not a
and Ed, I think our retreat would not deter Putin. It would only embolden him. We also think about China, who's watching. A loss for Moscow would be a loss for Beijing. And look, I'd also mention we're not fighting. I think people know that, but some people may not. And I think also there is oversight of the financial side of what's going to Ukraine. And most of the funds appropriated by Congress, most, not all, end up with American defense contractors. So,
true. And a lot of
these isolationist factions, they love taxpayer-backed subsidies for U.S. manufacturing jobs. They should applaud this.
Well, right. And, this is a lot of this is replacement. This is, we're sending them the inventory we already have and we're replacing it. With these funds. So yes, you're going to see more manufacturing. The question is, are we replacing it fast enough? And do we have the material and the resources to replace it fast enough?
That's a good question. That's a fair question.
Yep. All right. Well, AJ, we're out of time, but tell us where people can find you now.
In the hills. No. You can find me at
a survivalist camp. That's where you can find AJ.
Jeff Dunitz's famous lid blog. Lidblog.com, IsraelNationalNews.com, and various newspapers in small towns from Ohio and Minnesota to Tennessee and Virginia. I kid you not. I am everywhere, as you said, although in most of those papers, I'm covering local news, which can be also nationally important as well. So
is Israel National News? Is Israel National News the same thing as Arutz Sheva?
It is. Good pronunciation. It is the same as Arutz Sheva.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So you can find it either way, by the way, but I think people might be more familiar with that term than Israel National News. So I just want to make sure that people understand that. I want to make sure I understood it, and I want to make sure that everybody else.
I'm glad to hear our audience is familiar with the Hebrew.
Well, that's about it. That and shalom is pretty much my entire.
Probably the same as most Jews.
Yeah, well, and I'm Catholic, but yeah. All right, AJ Kaufman, thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned for another message coming up right after this from the Ed Morrissey Show. Thank you for watching or listening to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and through the Town Hall Media Player, or you can just come to hotair.com and watch my podcast for free. However, I'd also love to have you join us as members of our VIP and VIP Gold programs. That allows us to defeat the stranglehold that big tech has on information and get you the best information that we possibly can. Plus, we have a lot of new value-added content coming to us from Town Hall Media stars and my good friend Adam Baldwin. He and I are doing the video series, The Amiable Skeptics. It's 1 hour of discussion a week, strictly for our VIP and VIP Gold members. Plus, we have our VIP Gold chat with Kem Edwards every Wednesday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. We'd love to have you as members. Be sure to join up. Thanks again for watching the Ed Morrissey Show podcast.